Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Edmonton Public Library. My name is Terry Ubinski, and on behalf of Men's Rights Edmonton, I'd like to thank you for coming out this evening. Because we'd like this evening's message to be spread as widely as possible, we're going to be recording this evening's presentation. So be aware of that, and when you may and may not want to speak up. The format is going to be a presentation, then with questions and opportunity to interact at the end. So we'll save our questions at the end. So onward, I'm here on behalf of Men's Rights Edmonton, which is a group of men and women that are raising awareness of men's experiences in the many areas where men and boys are treated differently than women and girls. Men's Rights Edmonton is sponsoring this evening's presentation on behalf of ECMAS, the Equitable Child Maintenance and Access Society. ECMAS is a non-profit organization focused on the healthy development and well-being of children of separated and divorced families. Educational attainment and success is one area where boys are fared poorly compared to girls, despite being equally capable and equally worthy. Tonight's speaker is Dr. James S. Brown. Dr. Brown has a lifetime of experience in the education system. Jim graduated as an elementary school teacher in 1965 before going on to attain a doctorate in education, as well as postdoctoral diplomas in educational administration, curriculum, and instructional leadership. Jim has worked as an elementary teacher, a secondary teacher, a department head, a principal, and an Ontario supervisory officer. Dr. Brown is here with us tonight, spreading the message of his new book, Rescuing Our Underachieving Sons and Raising the Aspirations of our underachieving boys and rescuing our underachieving sons. I just met Jim Brown and his lovely wife Frances yesterday evening. There were several aspects of that meeting that made me particularly interested in what Dr. Brown will present this evening. First is his long and deep experience in education and educating children. Now, after a long and varied and successful career, Dr. Brown has made the added effort of crystallizing this experience, his insight, and importantly, his informed opinion on this important issue in education. Second was his clear empathy and concern for school children, both boys and girls. And thirdly, I know that both Mr. and Mrs. Brown are directly interested in the educational success of both boys and girls, in part because 9 of those boys and girls are their grandchildren. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. James Brown, author of the book, Rescuing Our Underachieving Sons, Raising the Aspirations of Our Underachieving Boys. Sons, excuse me.
Thank you kindly. Perhaps I should quit now while things still look good for me. We have what we're calling an odyssey, because we have been traveling for months now. We traveled through the UK and the US, and we've been working our way across Canada. So we've been doing this for months. And lest you think that we're doing this in high style, we're doing this with my van towing a trailer that I borrowed from my daughter. So we are happy to be here, and we're also looking forward to the trip home. Because we have Lloydminster coming up, and then we have Saskatoon, and then I will have difficulty holding the horses back as they head for home. But we also have an Eastern tour, a tour of Eastern Canada coming up, but it's not immediate. We are going to have to take a bit of a rest. So that's why it's called the Odyssey, and the point of it is that we're looking at equality. We're not looking at, this is not about what can we do to advantage boys or advantage men or whatever. This is basically saying we're looking at equality, and hence the logo on it that shows a little boy and a little girl, because this is what it's about. It's about giving all children an opportunity to succeed, be successful in school. Along with this, before we get home, we have meetings with the Native community, and we have had meetings with inner city black social workers and so on. We are trying to cover all the bases because we are looking at this as an equity issue. Now, it's been sponsored by these groups, and I'm not going to bore you with what it all stands for, but these are the groups that are sponsoring it, and they are the ones that organized this opportunity. Francis and I were coming out here anyway to meet with educational and community leaders. In fact, ACT has contacted us in terms of how would you like to do a presentation in Edmonton. A week later, we had presentations in Northern Ontario, we had one in Winnipeg, we had one in Saskatchewan. This was within a week. We suddenly found ourselves with a full agenda. So we are literally, we travel one day, we stay overnight, the next day we do a presentation, then we travel again to the next spot. So if we had had any dreams of this being a holiday, it certainly isn't. But we're happy to be here. And the message is summed up here. Boys are experiencing less success in the education system than girls are, even though they have the same ability. And so, in that sense, they're underachieving. Now, no one is saying we should do anything to disadvantage girls at all. This is entirely wonderful. Glad they're doing as well as they are. Now, how do we help boys to achieve that same kind of success? And the message here is not children who don't have the ability are not achieving. We're saying children with ability are not achieving. And so part of the message is we have gifted children who are not achieving as if they were gifted children. So that's part of the message too. The whole idea of underachievement is not reaching your potential. And that's what the message is about. It's about how do we help people to achieve to their potential. How do we know they're underachievers? Well, they score high on all the tests of ability we can give, but they underperform in school or in other academic settings. And most often, they're boys. And when I say most often, I don't mean 51%. I'm talking more like 80%. So there seems to be something that's a difficulty here. That's probably out of sequence. But a factor that results in underachievement, one of them is, and I think that's out of sequence. But anyway, it's lack of a same-sex role model. And that's an issue, I think, for a lot of people. The whole idea that, and I'm not saying that a family has to have two parents in the home at the same time. I'm not saying that. Other people might say it, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. I'm simply saying that if you don't have a role model, you're probably, not 100%, but you're probably facing the problem of underachievement. And there's a lot of research to support this. Now, that role model might be a teacher in school, a role model might be a scout leader, the role model could be a lot of different people. But if you don't have that role model, it's extremely difficult for boys or girls if they don't have it. This is not unique to boys. It's both are in that situation. What are the consequences? Well, one of the consequences is that children are retained in grade. Going old school, kids fail. The problem is, and we've known this since before I started in education, failing kids is likely to be more counterproductive than productive. And in fact, the research indicates that a child who's been failed twice is virtually 100% likely to drop out of school before completing high school. I mean, it's that compelling. Now, this isn't my opinion. This is what the research has been telling us for 50 years, probably longer than that. Another is having weak reading skills in later years. And that is a major, major problem. If you have weak reading skills, it's going to impact on, influence all the areas of your academic career. It's going to have major consequences if you have weak reading skills. And in fact, and I'll show you in a minute, the research suggests that the highest predictor, the number one predictor of long-term academic success in school is your level of reading readiness when you arrive at school. Before you even go to school, conceivably, there's a relatively accurate prediction of how well you're likely to do long-term. Now, if we were going to turn this into a 125-hour course, I could give you a lot of the detail of it, but the research tells us that this is going to be an issue. Another problem is that children very often are diagnosed with a learning disability because of those weak reading skills. In fact, the research would suggest that a lot of children acquire a learning disability at school. If they had never gone to school, they wouldn't have had the disability. And there are countries in the world that have higher academic attainment than we have, where the children don't begin school until they're 7. So there's a suggestion that in fact is a factor. As well, children whose birthdays fall in the last 2 months of the school year are 4 times as likely to be diagnosed with a learning disability as children whose birthdays fall in the first 2 months of the calendar year, assuming that your entry is based on the calendar year, as it is in many places. In the UK, it's based on, they use September to end of August, and of course, so the last 2 months would be July and August. But the reality is, how is that causing learning disabilities? How is that date of birth causing it? And if it has something to do with date of birth, why is it different in different provinces or different in different countries? The reality is that when children are not ready to learn to read because of their age, and the expectation is placed on them that they're going to read or be deemed failures, they develop a psychological block. And later, when they are physically able, because the synapses are now connected and so on, they're now physically able to learn to read, they can't because of this block. They have an aversion to reading. We don't have a test for that, but we do have a test for learning disability, and that's how it comes up. Now, I have been directly involved in research where we looked at changing our primary program in school to take kids the way they came. We went from 11% non-organic learning disabilities to virtually 0. So if someone's going to say to me, well, where's your evidence? That was pretty compelling evidence for me. Children who have late in the year birthdays, and this is, if you have a boy, this adds to it, are significantly more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than children who have early in the year birthdays. Now, I'm not saying they have ADHD, I'm saying they're more likely to be diagnosed with it. And the research I read recently suggests that 20% of the male high school students in the United States have been diagnosed with ADHD. 2/3 of whom are being medicated. So, you're looking at being medicated for ADHD. I'm not a physician, I don't pretend to be. But it strikes me that when one person at 5 is being diagnosed with ADHD, or any illness, I kind of have my doubts. I mean, if you look around the room, who around you has ADHD since obviously 1 in 5 of us does. For children who are weak in reading, they often end up with debilitating stress because they can't do what the school expects. They end up depressed, they have sleep disorders, they have low sense of confidence and self-esteem, a lot of them are school dropouts, hence they have no post-secondary education and so on. This just goes on like this. This cycle of underachievement is significant because at a presentation to sleep specialists and child psychiatrists, I was able to make this presentation, and the child psychiatrists and so on were saying, this is where the problem starts. And then it goes to here, and that results in lack of success, and then they go around the cycle. Of course, I said, wait a second, maybe we should start here. Maybe we should start here rather than starting here. And because every physician that was presenting, every expert was presenting, was all presenting on the basis, they were all presenting on the basis of pharmaceuticals. We need to give them all drugs. And I'm saying, I don't know. I don't think that's the case. I think if you are an achiever, if you feel good about yourself, if you're confident, if you can do this, you're a whole lot less likely to have feelings of inadequacy. You're a whole lot less likely to have debilitating stress. Because, hey, I'm good at this. You're a lot less likely to have depression, and so on. So we can start at this point, perhaps. I would prefer to think that if we started here and found a way to give children greater success, they're less likely to have all these other problems. Okay, now the research, this is not going to be a surprise to anybody, but the research shows that children that are achievers tend to come from these places. Didn't take long to lose interest, did it?
No, that's very interesting.
That's okay, it's all right. Lock the door so no one else can. All right, so they tend to come from more stimulating home environments. Well, you know, that's not a big surprise. That's not a big surprise. And it's important that parents read to children. Now, here's where we get into the boy issue. Parents read more to their daughters than they do their sons. And I guarantee you, if you ask parents, they'll tell you that's not true. But when you track it, it is true. And the research is very, very compelling because they basically track people. And the parents say, oh no, we read the same to both. And then when they actually track them, they read more of their daughters and sons. And then the answer is, well, it's hard to read to my son because he won't sit on my lap or whatever. He goes and plays with the truck. That's no reason to stop reading to him. He's still listening. He hasn't gone deaf because he's no longer sitting on your lap. But we tend to think in terms of, well, he's not sitting here, he's not interested anymore. Kind of like me watching these people pack up and think they're not interested. I don't think they're not interested. They just have other things to do. Anyway, so that's important. It's an important message that we stop and think about just how much time are we spending reading to our sons and our daughters. And if we're spending a lot more time reading to our daughters than our sons, why are we surprised when our sons arrive at school and they're not as verbal, they're not able to read as well, they're not as prepared? This isn't deliberate, obviously. It's just that people haven't thought about it. They've received more support and encouragement from parents, teachers, and society in general. Now, what's been happening to us is increasingly where 30 years ago, 40 years ago, parents would have said, I expect my son to go to university, I'm not so sure about my daughter. Increasingly, parents are saying, I expect my daughter to go, but you know, my son, he's probably not going to make it. That message is powerful. And when you convey that message, either directly in words or through your actions to your child, you find the child in a position where, okay, nobody expects me to do it, I guess I'm not going to be able to do it. So this is very, very important. These children have better self-esteem and more confidence, and Francis and I spent some time with a director and some superintendents and so on in Alberta, and they were working specifically on this issue. Because if you have good self-esteem, you're going to do better. So it's really very, very important for us to do that. And we both have experiences working with children where we've worked hard at building their self-esteem because those are the things that help them to achieve. Now these children who succeed, who achieve, work harder not only because they have this innate desire to achieve, but because they like what they're doing. So we have to look at how our curriculum operates, because boys and girls don't necessarily share the same interests. They don't bring the same attributes. And we need to be conscious of that. It's different. They have different learning styles. I'm not saying this is biological, because I don't know whether it's biological or not. But it's certainly societal. And when children come and they're really not engaged by what's going on, is it any wonder they don't achieve? Because they think, who cares about this? What's this got to do with anything? One of my favorites is going into a senior high school classroom, math classroom, and the teacher was doing a lesson on division with negative integers. So I'm pretty good in math. So I thought, division with negative integers. I couldn't think of any application for that at all. So I kind of wandered over to the teacher and said, excuse me, where would you use this? Figuring, he said, he thought about it and then he said, well, you might if you took math in university. And I thought, so kids sitting in the classroom, like, what's the point? Other than the fact the teacher told me how to do it. Well, if you are a pleaser, pick me, you'll do it. But then again, if you're a pleaser, the teacher can put a whole lot of nonsense syllables up on the board, and you'll memorize them. An awful lot of kids, particularly boys, are going to sit there and say, no way. They may put an adjective in that sentence, but that's basically what they're going to say. So what other factors influence the likelihood of boys achieving in school? Well, obviously one of these is having confidence in their own ability. If you believe you can do something, you're a long way along the line toward doing it. You're also likely to be much more interested in it. Attending schools that put some equal value on practical and theoretical studies. Now, I'm not talking about shop class versus, algebra. That's not what I'm talking about. But I am saying that if we start looking at practical uses for the things we're doing, we're more likely to engage our boys. And again, I'm not suggesting that this is biological. I mean, I have no idea if it's biological. But what I do know is that boys, from the time they're really little, are encouraged to engage in practical activity. And so this is one of the things we need to look at, that we have to put a value on that. Now, just to give you I'm just about to blow apart what I just said, but anyway, I suppose there's a difference. Now, albeit I'm not intelligent enough to figure it out, but I suppose there's a difference between learning the parts of the flower and how they interact to work, and learning the parts of the fuel injector and how it works. One of those, of course, is a pure science, and the other is an applied science. Unfortunately for me, I'm pretty good with the flower, not worth a hoot with the fuel injector, which could leave me stranded someday. Gender equity is very important, and I'm not talking in this point, I'm not talking about gender equity in the sense of, well, we have to have the same number of men teachers as women teachers. I will say that later, but here I'm making the point that we have to be prepared to value male and female interests and attributes. And the danger is that in many cases, particularly in our elementary schools, we don't. And I say that because I've never been a little girl. Never. Honest. You'll affirm that, won't you, Francis? Okay. Never been a little girl. I have 2 daughters and 6 granddaughters. I still don't know what it's like to be a little girl. I know what it's like to be a little boy. I also know that my grandchildren, my children, I have 5 children, my children and my grandchildren, obviously some are girls, some are boys. I know they have different interests. They have different characteristics. Now, whether that's caused by the way I raised them, I don't know. Who knows? But the reality is they have differences. And if I don't value one or the other, or don't value them equally, I'm going to have people with problems in terms of how they're doing. Okay, now I get to the other point. We really should be looking at a more equitable distribution of male and female teachers. Okay, I originally trained as an elementary school teacher. In my teacher's college year, more than 30% of the candidates were men. Now, I'm going to ask a rhetorical question, but what do you think the number is now? 5%. It's 5%. So the reality is the chances of a child attending a school in which there are no men at all are actually significant. I visited Waterloo Region in Ontario, spoke to the director. He said he has 27 schools in which there isn't a single man other than the custodian. And in some cases, even the custodian's a woman. So a boy arrives in that school, it's a totally female environment. Now, I go back to what I said before. Those women teachers, no offense to them at all, none, they don't know what it's like to be a little boy. Just the same as I don't know what it's like to be a little girl. And it's not like I haven't tried, but I don't know. I don't know. I mean, you raise daughters. And then my daughter says, my younger daughter, who has 3 daughters of her own, says to one of my sons, her sister and myself, well, girls have all these problems growing up, but boys don't have them. I'm thinking, oh, girls have lots of problems. Boys have different ones. But you know what? There's still problems. So we need to have this, start looking at getting some kind of equality, and we need to be doing something. Now, somebody will say, oh, well, what are you suggesting, affirmative action? Well, I'll tell you. I was a director of education. Ministry of Education Ontario told me, you don't have enough women principals in your school system. Do something about it. So when we got applications in for principals, we put all the men aside, and we only interviewed the women. We then had women principals. Then I was given the task of being on the examining committee for supervisory officer certification. And the ministry representative came in and said, if the candidate's a woman, she automatically passes. Unless you have compelling reasons to fail. If the candidate is a male, unless you have compelling reasons, he doesn't pass. Now, if you doubt that, I can give you all the details on it. Incidentally, I don't disagree with it. I didn't disagree with it then. I don't disagree with it now. So don't misunderstand this. This is not me saying we shouldn't have done it. I'm not saying that at all. If you want to change the culture, you got to break the existing one. I have no problem with that. The problem I have now is, now we've got schools, we got 27 schools in one school district that don't have a single male in it. So shouldn't we do something now to kind of even that up a bit? It was okay to do it 20 years ago. Why is it not okay to do it now? And that would be my argument. Not because men are better teachers than women, or none of that. The reality is when a little boy arrives in school, he's dealing with the issue of role models. That's one thing. But the second thing he's dealing with is the whole issue of gender identification. My older sister will proudly tell you, I know it's hard to believe there's anyone older than me, but my older sister will proudly tell you that she was a tomboy. Well, do you know what? I'm not about to stand up here and proudly tell you that I was a little girly boy. See, I'm not telling you now either. Okay, so the point is that we have to be conscious of the fact that when a little boy arrives in a school that's totally female, this is a girl-female activity. And it's not for me, because it's for girls. When a girl arrives in a totally male situation, it's acceptable because it's okay to be a tomboy. But I can tell you, in terms of street cred for boys, I don't think so. I'm going to go, Frances was a significant field hockey player. In fact, she has a Bobby Orr-Knee to show for it. Well, guess what? I never played field hockey. Lots of girls did, but I didn't. Teachers need to be aware of their own gender bias, and it's not deliberate, so don't think I'm saying that people are this is some kind of insidious plot. It's not. But we need to be aware of our gender bias. Okay, this study was done at Queen's University, Ontario. It was done in the US, and it was done in the UK. So it's not just a fly-by-night. It was done in all three. They gave teachers papers to mark. The same paper. If it had a girl's name on it, it got a higher grade than if it had a boy's name on it. This was consistent. That's that issue of, it's the halo effect. Now, to give you a specific example of my own experience, when I was working in the UK, I was working with secondary school students, and I was supposed to be helping some kids get ready for their GCSE exams, which are like their graduation exams. So there was one boy that I hadn't heard about, and I was wondering why I hadn't heard about him, because he was quite, well, he couldn't read for starters, so he was, and I wasn't getting anyone asking me to help him. So I went to the English teacher, really nice young fellow, went to talk to the English teacher, said, "How's Paul doing?" He said, "Great. He's just doing great." Well, Paul was the nicest kid you could possibly meet. He was a pleaser, he was his hand up all the time, he was just absolutely a king. So he said, "Oh, here, come over here and show you." He opened his mark book. Paul didn't have a single grade over 20%, and none of his coursework was in. And the teacher thought he was doing great because of the halo effect. What a nice guy. He must be doing great. In reality, he was headed in the, well, that sounds where he was headed. That's where he was headed. And nobody was helping him. I was paid to help him. And nobody was saying, "Help this guy." Well, it wasn't deliberate. It's not somebody, evil person saying, "Oh, we should do this." Not at all. It was just that when I see somebody who's polite and interested and keen and good looking and all the other factors, there's a halo around that person. Now, I hope I'm not using a term that really antiquated. You do know what a halo is, right? I hope you do. You don't see one around me, so you can draw your own conclusions there too. So there are three basic factors that we talk about in terms of that contribute to underachieving boys. So one is parental practice, one is how the school system operates, and the third is factors in society in general. Well, as I say, if this was 125 hours, we might do something else, but given the facts of one evening, the focus of this is basically on what can parents do. Now, that links to the school, because how can the school help the parents to do this, is what we're talking about here. So we have a booklet that we put out. It's based on the information in this. This, from beginning to end, is like there's 400 sources in this, more or less. So if somebody counts them and says it's only 398, I'm sorry. It's around 400 sources. But it's useless to give this, typical parents say, "Here, read this, I've got a test on it tomorrow." So it's 400 pages long. So and it's very academic. So okay. So we produced a small pamphlet that's only 8 pages long that gives parents ideas of what they might do. How can you help your child? Well, you help your son particularly, but it applies to girls, it applies to others as well. It's just that boys are underachieving, so that's what this is about. So the booklet number 1 is how parents can help their sons to become achievers in school. It doesn't say how they can guarantee they're going to be achievers. It's just some of the ways you can help. Early experiences are really important to long-term success in school. As I said at the beginning, the number 1 predictor of long-term success at school is what you bring with you when you arrive at school. I'm not saying you can't change it, but that's the number 1 predictor. It's not the only predictor, but it's the number 1 predictor. And that's, of course, what I just said. So. Reading readiness is a big factor. You don't have to be able to read, but you have to have attitudes and attributes toward it. Now, largely due to the way we parent now, parents are often as much as 6 months behind girls. That wasn't the case 40 years ago. I was around 40, well, actually I was around a lot more than 40 years ago, but I was in education 45 years ago. It wasn't the case then. Boys might have been a little bit behind, but they weren't as much as 6 months behind. So what factors have happened? Well, one thing is parents are really busy. You've got two parents working, or you've got single parent families and the parents busy all the time. You've got parents that are busy ferrying their children back and forth to sports events and so on. You know, I mean, you think about how the world has changed in that sense. You know, I can't let Michael walk to his baseball practice because it's 4 blocks away and he's only 15. So, you know, it's that kind of, so I don't have time now to read to John because I'm busy then. And if I do have time to read, I'm going to read to the one who's more likely to be attentive and so on, which happens to be my daughter. I come home from work, I play soccer with my son out in the yard. I get the hockey stick out and we play some ball hockey. I come in and I read to my daughter. What a surprise. Girl my daughter's ahead of my son when they arrive at school. And unfortunately, the school system's not very good at closing the gap. Now, this is not a criticism of the school system, so don't misunderstand. The school system, the way it's structured, isn't very good at closing that gap. If the school system were good at closing the gap, there would be no point in me being here this evening. But it's not very good at it. And the result is that many boys struggle with reading and fall even further behind. And so, when you arrive at school and it's a girl's activity and you're a boy, and besides you're not very good at it, and little girls very often have good fine motor skills because of the kinds of activities they've engaged in as little girls, and boys have good large muscle coordination and so on because of the activities they engaged in, and the school puts all its value on fine motor. And this is not an insidious plot, so don't anybody take it that I'm saying that. It's just, those are the realities that when children arrive at school. And the school does not say, we're going to grade you on how well you can run around the classroom kicking a soccer ball. But we are going to grade you on how well you can use your fine motor skills to write or print or draw. And so, you know, we got little boys at a disadvantage immediately. So we're suggesting there are a lot of small changes, as I'm not here to say, listen, I'm going to tell you how to be a parent. I'm not. Having been through it 5 times, trust me, I'm not. But there are a lot of small changes that people can make that will make a big difference. Small changes make a big difference. So what can they do? Well, one of these. We need to change some of our child-rearing practices. For example, the research is now pretty compelling that little children learn to speak holistically. So it's important that we actually hold a child so that the child can see us speaking when we speak to that child. Now, you can say what you want. Mothers are more likely to do it than fathers. And they're also more likely to do it with daughters than sons. And that's a research issue. That's not, I think. That's what research tells us. Read to children. Listen to them read. Well, I'm not talking about an onerous task like, okay, now we got 4 hours of reading. If you're talking 5 minutes even. Because and particularly for dads, it's really important for your little boys to see reading as something that men do. They never see you read. They never see you read. It's not something men do. Because see, I'm a guy. My dad's a guy. And I'm going to be like my dad. And he never reads. He may read, but if you don't see him, if I don't see him reading, I don't know he's reading. He reads. So that's important. Read to children, listen to read. Let the children see you read. Now another one, and this is a really important one. Give children their own books even before they can read. I'm one who didn't do that. Because I didn't know. I didn't know that, how important that was. So in my situation, in the garage, we had every Sunday, this is not a segue, We had every size skates, from the smallest to bigger than my feet, hanging on the garage wall. We had hockey skates and we had figure skates, every size. Got them at garage sales, got them wherever. Whoever needed a pair of skates took whatever size he or she needed. When you're finished with them, put them back. No problem. Next year, or partway through the year, needed a bigger pair of skates, you took a bigger pair. But we did the same thing with books. We put the books like they were a library. Mistake. We should have been saying, this is your book. Write your name in it, draw pictures in it, it's your book. But see, this is my book. I can't read it, but it's mine. Like my teddy bear, it's mine. Would you read my book for me, please? When you finish it, it's mine. So I now have an affinity for books. Books are great. Books are terrific. And when I go to Uncle Terry, or when I go to my mom or dad, they read me my book. And I now have an affinity for books. I didn't know that. The research on this fairly recent, incident. So it's important that the children actually have books. And I'm not talking about impossible books, but it's useful to have. Research shows that boys that are provided with books that have certain characteristics are more likely to have a higher level. So what are these characteristics? No great shock. Books that have the male as a central character. Now, don't misunderstand me here at all. When you go into a bookstore, most of the books are suitable for young girls. And that's understandable because we buy 10 times as many books for girls as boys. So if I were in the publishing business, I wouldn't bother publishing for boys. I publish for girls, that's what the market is. I mean, why would I waste my resources on a little market like this when I can work with this market? So books that have a male as a central character. So people will say to me, yeah, but what about gender neutral books? There aren't any. Sorry, there aren't any. Sexist as this sounds, if it doesn't have a male as a central character, I don't identify with it. Sorry, I'm trying to be everybody here, so don't misunderstand. Okay, books that boys actually own, even if they can't read them, that's an important factor. Ideally, they're books that contain action, adventure, problem solving by boys. Hopefully, books that portray the central character modeling desirable behaviors. So, okay, I got this great book for my son, and it's about this guy who killed 16 people. No. So we want to be looking at modeling good behavior, and good behavior is, believe it or not, it's pictures of little boys reading, pictures of little boys problem solving. They're doing things on the internet. They're busy searching for and applying knowledge. All these things we want the boys to do. And if there are people in the room here saying, what's wrong with the killing 16 people? Sorry, I told you I wasn't going to say I was a girly boy, but maybe. Books in which the vocabulary allows them to be read to boys by their parents, initially, and that the boys will eventually be able to read themselves. Well, you need a vocabulary that is basically, that works in terms of the Dolch list of words, which are the most commonly used words in the English language. You want books that have a lot of those in them, because the children will see them frequently. So, this is important that they have this. So, an example is, this is a book called The Enormous Goldfish, and I arranged to have this written specifically based on the research. This book is written specifically based on the research around how little boys learn to read. And then Francis and I moved on, and we wrote our own. So this is the adventures of Jack and Gizmo. If you ask me which one's which, the little black cat there is my cat, Gizmo. Okay, just so you know, I'm not that little boy, but the cat's mine. His adventures are Francis's cats. In the book, the cat gets into all kinds of things. It's her cat. Mine is a lazy lump that doesn't, fat lazy. But we also have it in various forms. So we have the adventures of Janelle and Gizmo. Because when we were working in Toronto, we had a whole group of people that needed books, but they needed books that boys could identify with. Well, guess what? The little whitey boy didn't cut it with the black kids. So now we're looking at going into French versions, and we're looking at going into, we're going to work with the Aboriginal community and hopefully have them come up with some that they can use. There are three things that the research on Simon Fraser tells us will make a difference. One of these is having daily conversations with your child about things that happen at school. Now, don't misunderstand. What did you learn at school today? All together? Now, some of you were saying that because of your children, and some of you are saying it because of yourself, so I realize that. But the point is, what did you learn out of this presentation this evening? Nothing. The point is, you have to consistently ask the question, and you have to expect an answer. I don't mean you have to say you're good, not having your dinner until you give an answer, but the point is you have to say, this is important, I really want to know. I really want to know something you learned today that's of value. Now, I had the opportunity to apply this because I was working with a group of 14, 15, 16-year-old kids that couldn't read at all. And every morning they came to me and we set out our expectations for the day. That's the set, clarify expectations. We set those out. What are we going to do today? And at the end of each day, they came back and they had to say, okay, what did I learn today that was of some value? Now, we did that consistently. And it was absolute torture the first few times we did it. But after a while, they knew that was going to happen. So they came, and during the course of the day, they thought about it. Like old man Brown's going to give us, he's going to be insistent to come up with something. He's better come up with something intelligent. Because how many times in a row can I say, I had a lot of fun at recess? So, we kind of had to do that. Model a desired behavior. I mean, if they see you modeling that behavior, they're much more likely to engage with it and feel it's something worthwhile. Those three things, and this is for parents, but it's for anybody, those three factors, according to the Simon Fraser research, can result in up to a 30% gain in terms of kids' performance at school. Those three things alone. Now, are you going to tell me that's difficult? I mean, as a parent, the first time you do it, probably difficult. But after a while, it's, you're talking about a 2-minute exercise. So it's not difficult. This is not saying relearn how to be a parent. This is just a question of saying hi. Instead of just saying hi, what do you want to do now? It's a question of saying hi. Okay, what did you learn today that was of value? And after you get past the nothing, eventually they will start telling you back. Now, why does that work? It works because the child has to begin to rethink the day. The child has to begin to apply higher level thinking skills, which is evaluating. I have to think, okay, what was more important than, because my parents were only going to put up with me saying I learned how to put a capital letter on cents, so many times. After that, I'm going to have something a little more concrete than that. So that means the child now begins to apply higher level thinking skills. Now, this isn't Jim Brown saying, I think. This is what the research is telling us. Parents can help a lot if they share their personal knowledge about their child with the teacher. See, I don't challenge the fact that the teachers are experts in teaching. I don't challenge it. But the person who's the best expert on that child is that child's parents. Now, if I share my knowledge of my child with you, who's the teacher, and you share your knowledge about teaching with me, and we together plan for this child, the child's going to be a lot better off. We do it collaboratively. When did you hold your parent information or your parent meetings at school, Francis?
Originally at the end of the year, and then we started at the beginning of the school year because we wanted to share information.
I mean, they did that intuitively. They didn't do that on the basis of any research. They just did it intuitively. That if you meet the parents and talk to the parents talk to the teacher, we share information when we're better off. We need to engage in parent-teacher conferences where we meet as equals. Because I've had lots of experience, and I'm not picking on teachers, so please don't take it that way. But I've had lots of experience sitting in a situation where the parents come in and the teacher starts down the litany. Now, hopefully you know what a litany is, but they stacked down the list of all the things the kid's done wrong. Well, you know, after the 25th item, the parent got the message. You know, pardon the language, but your kid's crap and you're a rotten parent. Parents got that, okay. That's not helpful. It's not helpful. What is helpful is to say, usually your son is having difficulty with, and you express some of these. You don't need to give a million examples. But now the issue is, what are we going to do about it? How can we work together to see that this changes? Not how can I tell you how to be a parent? Or a parent saying, I'm having trouble at home, so you discipline. No, we got to work together on this. So that's what the research tells us. The other is that having high expectations for our sons as well as our daughters is important. And when we start saying, my daughter's going to go to university and become a professional, and incidentally, most of the people in professional schools now are women. But my son's going to get a good job, and just name the area, in a job that will not exist 25 years ago. 10% of the young people between the age of 16 and 24 in Canada, 10% are neither in school nor employment. And it's mostly boys. And they are probably, I'm not saying 100% guaranteed, but they're probably going to be long-term unemployed the rest of their lives. We got to do something about that. Not only for them, but for all of us. What kind of a society are we going to have if we have a whole crowd of young people who become older people who have no hope? They have no hope of employment. They have no hope of decent salaries or self-esteem or any of these things. They have no hope. What's going to happen to our society? So and frankly, what young woman who's just graduated from veterinary school is going to want to marry one of these guys? No offense to the guys, but so what are we doing to our society? I mean, we need to take a look at how we can prevent some of this. We need to look at some gender equity in our hiring practices. Remember what I said. I had no objection. I was part of it. Putting more women in principals' positions, hiring more women teachers in math and science. I was part of it. Loading the deck so that we had more qualified women eligible for supervisory officer positions, so we get more superintendents and directors. I'm not embarrassed about it at all. I am embarrassed that now that it's gone way over here, we haven't been prepared to say, wait a minute, affirmative action and all these kinds of things are about equity. They're not about favoring one group or another. They're about creating equity. They're about creating fairness. We need to look at some of these things. We also need to look at the fact that not everybody learns the same way. Not everybody demonstrates what they've learned the same way. It's different. Now, getting back to this group of students that I had that couldn't read and write, these little kids couldn't read and write. So they go into science class, and the teacher puts on the whiteboard, write an essay on the following. And they don't do it. And the teacher, when I go and talk to the teacher, the classroom teacher says to me, they're defying me. So they're not defying you. They can't read what you've written on the board. They haven't got a hope of doing the assignment. Actually, they know quite a bit about science. Just ask them, they'll tell you. So are you going to grade them on their knowledge of science? Or are you going to grade them on their ability to read and write? Now, remember, I'm not talking about, on their PhD, are you going to let them just do it all verbally? No, that's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about children in school that are handicapped because of whatever, and they're not very good at reading and writing. Are you going to say, well, therefore they can't write an essay in history, so they mustn't know any history, or they can't do this assignment in home economics or food sciences or whatever? They can't do that because they can't read and write. Well, like in fairness, we have to find other ways to let them demonstrate that they have the knowledge. Otherwise, we're basically saying, scrap everything else, we're just going to test them on reading and writing. Well, I don't think that's what we want to do in our society. Okay, now I'm wrapping up here. This has all been based on part of what's in the book. I'm not holding it up because I'm trying to sell it. I'm just basically saying that's dealing with about a third of what's in the book, and the other 2/3 are dealing with school and society. That's what the book looks like, in case you didn't notice when we held it up. They're available. There's no book outlet that's selling them except you can get them online. And it's also based on the booklet, How Parents Can Help Their Sons Become Achievers in School, which looks like that. And they can be obtained either tonight or you get them at a nominal cost by email from me. And there are other booklets in this series. One is How the Education System Can Help Boys, How Parents Can Help Boys, the Education System Can Help Boys, and How Society's War on Boys, don't get mad at me because I said that, How Society's War on Boys contributes to the underachieving school. If we have had, if this is a 125-hour course, I'll start talking about society and what it's doing to boys, but that's a topic for another night. So, ladies and gentlemen,
Well, thank you all for holding your questions to the end. If you've got any points that you'd like to bring up or questions that you have for Jim, now would be an ideal time to ask. Go ahead.
A couple of things. I'm not an educator and I'm just going by memory, but didn't the Waldorf program, I don't know if you're familiar with it,
I am.
address these kinds of things by starting classroom rote learning a little later? Mm-hmm. And number two was, I thought Sesame Street solved all this.
Well, number one, provinces put in place testing for children in grade 3. And if your child went to a Waldorf school, probably hadn't even begun reading by grade 3. So the Waldorf schools took a hit because their kids obviously didn't do as well as others. Now, if you want to go to Finland, you'll find out they don't start school when they're 7. And you know what? Their schools are doing better than ours are. So part of this is the political agenda, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, so don't misunderstand. But the political agenda goes around, we'll test all these kids in grade 3, and we'll demonstrate how well they're doing. Well, if you think of how unfair that is, if your birthday's in January, by the time you write the test in grade 3, you're a whole lot older than I am, because my birthday's in December. In fact, you may have been born at 12:01, and I may have been born at 11:59, so maybe a full year older than I am, and we're both going to write the same test. Well, no wonder I'm not doing as well. I'm a whole year younger. At my age, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But believe me, when you're 8 or 9 years old, it's a big difference. So yeah, there are a lot of good ideas out of things like Waldorf and so on, but unfortunately, because of public pressure on the governments to have accountability, and someone obviously thinks that testing all the kids in grade 3 is some kind of accountability, well, that disadvantages organizations like the Waldorf schools. In terms of Sesame Street, actually, you might be interested in hearing this. If you take a class size of 32 and reduce it to 16, the research, the meta-analysis of that shows about a 5% gain for the children. If you go from 32 to 16, about a 5% gain. If you take the same 32 kids and show them Sesame Street, you get a 5% gain. So that's the Sesame Street effect. It's a lot more It's a lot more effective than a lot of people give it credit for. Did it solve all the problems? No. Big Bird notwithstanding. And I don't mean Larry Robinson for anybody who's old enough to remember Larry Robinson. Just give my usual opinion. Have I discouraged everybody? I hope not. There's a video of this.
Sure. The words achievement and struggling are very nebulous. I was wondering if you could perhaps give a little bit more elaboration on what are the measurements that were used to define the struggling of how the children are reading.
When we talk about achievement, we're basically talking about, for one thing, staying in school. We're talking about obviously staying in school and producing good grades. We're talking about people who go on to post-secondary education, and those are the measures of achievement. Don't misunderstand, there are a lot of other measures. And I come from a holistic background, so if we had another evening, I could talk to you about a whole lot of other ways to measure achievement other than, because I could go into the affective domain very nicely and talk about those issues. But this is achievement in terms of you know, I mean, are you going to get a good job? Are you going to have a good future, and so on? Struggling, and the dilemma around struggling is that I don't tend to think in terms of kids struggling, but I think what happens is that sometimes we have a set of expectations that we're asking people to meet that they aren't at that point of meeting yet. And what the child psychologists are saying now is that we're looking at probably age 12 or older before all your synapses are in place. So asking people to do tasks they aren't necessarily ready to do too early is very detrimental, and they end up struggling. Now the classic for me, because I keep coming back to myself, the classic for me is my youngest son had Velcro running shoes, like Velcro tie running shoes. So tying your shoelaces was never an issue. Just, so I came home from work one day, and my older daughter, like older than him, came downstairs and says, "Look what Paul can do. He tied his shoelaces. Took her 10 minutes to teach him." If she tried a year earlier, he'd have been frustrated, she'd have been frustrated, and a year later, he still wouldn't have wanted to tie his running shoes because it was just a horrible experience. When he was ready to learn it, not fast. The research around toilet training, sorry to segue here, but suggests the same thing. That when we push kids into toilet training before they're ready, very often they end up being toilet trained later than they would have been had we just postponed it a bit. If they're not ready, postpone it a bit. Well, that's what the research around learning to read suggests. The child's not really ready at this point. We need to postpone that. And so there's a difference between invitations to read and expectations that people will do it. So that's struggling becomes a case that I can't do this. And once I decide I can't do it, it may take quite a bit to get me to believe that it's even worth trying. Because you know what? I don't like making a fool of myself too many times. Not too many times. Sorry, the gentleman over here. Yes, sir.
You made the assertion earlier that girls are better at fine motor skills and boys are at gross motor skills.
Not every girl and not every boy, so don't misunderstand.
Actually, I'm bad at gross motor skills and good at fine. So
Yeah.
But I know I'm just one person. But what I want to know is where are your statistics on that show this? I'm not sure
It's in the research in here, and for me to do it off the top of my head, I couldn't do it. But the research does show that, and it comes from a background in terms of the expectations we set for girls in the activities they do. So but it's not true for everybody, because the reality is I'm a klutz too. So
my example is drawing. I can draw really well. I know lots of guys can draw. So
that's right.
That's a fine motor skill. So
lots of guys can't.
Lots.
This is not an absolute. This is not all girls, all boys.
Lots of girls can too, but I'm saying I would say just many.
Well, the research doesn't support that, so I can't.
It's penmanship.
I can't argue the question because the research doesn't support it. It supports the idea that, in fact, there is a difference in fine motor skills and gross motor skills.
Well, I know that, I don't know, but I think that the variation is just as large within the specific genders to make it, to negate your whole point, because I think that there's, and with all other things, there's much variation between boys
Yeah.
and other boys and girls and other girls. That,
Think in terms of a Venn diagram with an overlap.
yeah,
That's how you have to think of it. The reality is there's an enormous variation in girls as there is in boys. But when you take the meta approach to it and look at the full picture, you're going to find out that the boys are in a different, they're frankly in a different group than girls are when you take the whole group.
I wouldn't call that
There's
meta,
big
I would call
overlap.
it generalizing.
Beg pardon?
I wouldn't call it meta, I would call it generalizing, and it's kind of unfair.
All right, well, you know, as I say, I can only tell you what the research says, and I'm not, you know, if you have research that says something else,
Well, I see
I'm glad.
methodology that shows that, because I don't, what you just call it Venn diagram and meta, I call it generalizing, so I'm not sure if it works. I'd like to see your research.
Well, as I say, I'm not going to pull it up right
Why, I
now.
don't want to buy your book on research.
I'm not, I mean, the book is free on the internet, so
Okay.
you can read it there. Yes, sir.
I'm curious, I mean, you speak a lot about reading ability, and my impression is we're reading less these days. In fact, you know, your book is available in a downloads off Amazon. So I wonder if we're not moving to more visual anyways, you know, and sort of brings to mind also the fact that young boys are more involved with video games and things like that. So how does that kind of fix into your reading skills when
Well,
it's almost going...
No, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And if we do this again 20 years from now, we'll be at a different point. We need to deal with the now, however, and the now is that boys are dropping out of school. But the now is there's been a 70% increase. I'm sorry, research again. It's been a 70% increase in the last 10 years in the number of boys completing secondary school who say they'll never set foot in a classroom again. And this is at a time we're in a knowledge society. Well, if we're in a knowledge society, I mean, if that's the reality, maybe it's not. Maybe we're into something else, and I don't know. But if that's what we're in, then we're leading with the reality that if in fact we're discouraging children from that situation, from pursuing post-secondary education, we're in trouble. Now, don't misunderstand. I taught a boy who couldn't read at all in grade 12. And his argument was perfectly valid. Like, why can't I do this in movie form? The movies didn't exist. Sorry, that was the reality. I mean, you know, today maybe they do, but they didn't then. So I couldn't say to him, here's the alternative. There wasn't one. If there had been, I would have said, here's the alternative. There wasn't one. Now, will there be in any of these things 10 years from now? Well, you know, I don't know. But I have to deal with the now, and the now is that if I got a little boy and he arrives at school at 4 years of age and he's already saying, Ontario, if he arrives at school at 4 years of age and he's already saying he doesn't want to go to school, I got a problem. And that's the reality of the now, and I have to prepare. You know, I realize that generals prepare